Why does surrounding yourself with another language help you to learn it? Is passive listening enough, or do we have to pay attention? Does it matter what kind of content we're watching or listening to? And how often do we have to absorb content in our target language for it to work? Ultimately, if you're surrounded by your target language, either listening to it or watching content on a daily basis, or living in the country that the language is spoken, that will help. Any daily exposure to it, your brain will get used to it, and it will get you closer to your language goals. But in this video, we'll dive deeper so I can tell you exactly why. My name's James, I'm a native English speaker. Puedo hablar español e anche posso parlare italiano. I help people reach a conversational level in a different language. First point, pattern recognition. So our brains naturally are looking for patterns in our daily life, whether we're trying to learn a new skill or anything, because our brain wants to understand how things work and join the dots in everything that we see and we consume. So when it comes to language learning, our brains, whether we're watching TV or listening to a podcast or listening to radio in our target language, your brain is naturally trying to work out, okay, what does this mean? How's it related to something else that I know? Okay, it's trying to make sense of it, because from a survival and instinctive perspective as human beings, if we understand what's going on, we understand the news around us, and we know what's happening and when, we feel safer as a species. So your brain will naturally try and get you to a point where if someone says something to you, or some people are talking, it's in your best interest to understand what's being said, and your brain tries to recognize that. Your brain is thinking, what's going on here? Should I need to know this? Is this required for my survival? Do I need to know what's going to happen? Will it be a threat to me? So naturally, any language that your brain does not understand, it will try and figure it out. So by surrounding yourself with language in any form, visual or even written, that will take you closer to your language goals, because your brain will associate it, and it will make it easier for your brain to understand what's going on in the future. On that note, I've created a free email course on how to learn a language despite having a busy lifestyle. It contains a range of tips and tricks and works for any language, suitable for all levels, and it helps you achieve your language goals in less time if you're really busy. There's a link in the description below to check it out. Point number 2. Understanding the sounds and emotional meaning behind the words is essential. So it's all good and well you reading something in Spanish or in whatever your target language is, but you can sort of understand sarcasm or different ways of intonations vocally that people do. So that portrays a lot of their emotion. That's why if you get a text from someone, it's not as good as speaking to them on the phone or a video call or in person, because you can't portray the emotions in a word. So, when it comes to language learning, if you're listening to a podcast or watching a video and you can see or you can hear different emotions, you can know what that emotion of happiness, sadness, anger is in that language. Languages have different cultures, and by understanding the language and the culture, they're intertwined. A lot of phrases don't make sense in English or in your target language outside of that language, but if you can understand how things are said, and if it's a joke or if it's sarcastic, you can understand the language better in that way. So surrounding yourself in a different language allows you to understand the culture and the intonation of what people are saying. Next point, contextual association. So if I learn something by watching something on Netflix or I see something happening in the street, if I'm living in a place where my target language is spoken, then I can assign, okay, they just said that, and that means, okay, I've seen now what it means. I can hear it, but also I can see that someone's laughing. It's obviously a joke. So that the last thing they said obviously was funny. And that is essentially how babies learn, because they're watching what's going on around them, absorbing as much as possible, and then they can associate what that word or sound means with what's happening around them. And that's how we learn too. This also means that it's easier to learn by associating words with a context than just trying to memorize it on a list or on a table or something. If you have a English word and a Spanish word, you can learn it that way. But if you learn by watching other people or socializing and understanding the word that's said in that context, then you'll find that a lot of the words you learn, you can remember what context you were in when you heard that word first. A lot of the time when I was living in Spain, I would hear someone say a word and I didn't know what it meant until I was like, that's what it must mean then, because I connected the dots in my head. And if you ask me, I could give you many examples of new words that I learned just from context, not from trying to memorize anything or looking at in a textbook or anything. So it's super useful. Next point is, by surrounding yourself with language, you then get your mind used to the language and what it means and the meaning behind every sound. And this relates to less cognitive load. So this is the next point. And what do I mean by this? Basically, you have to think less. And when you have to think less about what's being said to you, you can understand it better and more quickly generate a response to what's being said. So that's where we get near to fluency, where you're not translating in your head. If you have to translate in your head after you hear something, that's a lot of cognitive load. That's a lot of effort in thinking. And if you reduce that, you minimize the time between when you hear something, you understand it instantly, and you can think instantly, okay, what's my response, and respond. So the benefit of surrounding yourself with the language is your brain gets used to sounds and meaning of what's going on around you, which means that in turn, it's more familiar with what it sounds like, so it can interpret it quicker and not need to translate, which then makes it easier for conversation. The final point is grammar automation. So when we learn phrases and sentences and things like that, you don't have to study grammar on a table. You don't have to study grammar by writing it down or reading grammar that's written down. That can help you. But if you are listening passively or actively in a conversation with people or surrounding yourself in a language in some extent, you can understand how certain words go together, how phrases are constructed based on the context. Like if someone's talking about the past tense, you hear a different word, but it sounds like something else. And that's called a conjugation. When you hear there's a word and it's got a different ending, for example, in Spanish or Italian, it's conjugated because of its tense. And if you know the context of what's being said, or you're watching something, or you're listening to someone talk about their past, you're like, oh, they use the word for do in the past, in the exact moment. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you could use it like that. And a lot of us, and especially as babies, we learn grammar by listening to other people speak and in conversations. So you don't actually have to study grammar by sitting down and studying it for an hour like many of us might put off on a weekly basis and never actually get round to. Instead, by passively listening to a podcast or the radio or watching TV, your brain naturally learns grammar because it understands the context in which it's used. So that's it. Passively listening and exposing yourself to content in your target language is super useful for getting closer to your language goals. If you're living in the country where your target language is spoken, even better. But you can't associate yourself with native speakers like yourself. You have to an extent, live in the language and absorb as much as you can with what's around you. So that's the important thing. But everything I've talked about just now is exactly why it helps you to surround yourself with language and what is going on in your brain in terms of thinking as to how your brain is helping you learn language. As with anything, the more time you spend surrounding yourself with language, the faster you will reach your language goals. So on a daily basis is the optimum amount. However, if it's every other day or every few days, that's better than nothing. Any amount is better than nothing, but the more you do, the better you get at it. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you later.